Hello everybody, this is Kirby over Yonder, and today on Raw or Rebirth, we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorite shows, The Amazing World of Gumball. Gumball was pitched to Cartoon Network in the late 2000s with a 1-minute animated pilot showing off all of Gumball's school friends. Gumball and Darwin look pretty different here than how they do in the show itself. Gumball is smaller, has a bigger head, and has a yellow sweater, and Darwin is a 3D model, which is completely different from how he is in the show itself. As for the school characters, surprisingly most of them don't actually look that different. There are a few noticeable differences, but as a whole these characters' designs haven't really changed much. I don't really mind that though, as I think these characters were very well designed from the start and mesh well with their world. And as a whole, I think this pilot is pretty good. I don't think this pilot's amazing or anything, it's not that funny, but it's definitely charming, and I think it does a good job introducing the show. Cartoon Network picked up Gumball at around 2011, which was pretty perfect timing, as this was around the time Adventure Time and Regular Show had started airing, which definitely helped breathe new life into Cartoon Network. Gumball premiered in May of 2011, though it wasn't quite the same show we know it as today. Honestly, if you forgot that Gumball Season 1 even existed, I really wouldn't blame you. I mean, it's not that it's a bad season or anything, it's just not really that good either. I'll give it this, it's definitely different from the rest of the series, which I guess makes it memorable. It kind of feels like an alternate universe version of SpongeBob SquarePants. This season definitely feels more like a kid's cartoon than the rest of the series, which definitely isn't a bad thing. I mean, it is a kid's cartoon, but there's less in there for older viewers. There's definitely less meta jokes, fourth wall breaks, pop culture references, animation shifts, dirty jokes, and pretty much everything that people know Gumball for. And I think the lack of all those things definitely contribute to the overall madness I feel towards the season. And obviously the animation is a lot different. It doesn't look bad, I actually think it looks pretty good, but I think the later seasons do a better job blending the characters into their world. To be fair, weaker animation is a thing that applies to the first season of most cartoons, so I can't really be mad at this season for it, and like I said, the season still looks pretty good. Another thing this season isn't very good at is character consistency. In the Goons, Gumball, Darwin, and Richard are all portrayed as idiots, yet in the prank, they're all able to play elaborate pranks on each other. In The Robot, Nicole and Ananias are able to fall for what is obviously a disguise, despite them both being two of the smartest characters on the show. In The Helmet, Richard is able to easily trick Nicole, yet in The Wand, he gets tricked by Gumball and Darwin. In The Genius, both Gumball and Darwin are portrayed as flat-out idiots, yet in The Quest they're able to sneak by a sleeping T-Rex, only screwing up because of something that wasn't their fault. See what I mean about the characterization being pretty weird this season? To be fair though, this is somewhat excusable because it is the show's first season. They're still trying to figure out who these characters are, as well as the humor, tone, storytelling, pretty much everything. And yeah, this very much does feel like a first season, which doesn't necessarily make it bad. I mean, it definitely is charming, I'll give it that. But this season has nothing on Season 2 onwards. So, how exactly does Season 2 improve upon Season 1? Well, as they say in celebrities, what do they know? Do they know things? Let's find out. Let's find out. So I know most cartoons evolve and change over time, but Season 2 of Gumball feels almost like a completely different show from Season 1. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I like the changes that were made. First off, the animation here looks a lot nicer than in Season 1. I still don't think Season 1 looked bad, but here the characters look a lot less static and blend in better with the backgrounds. The comedy is also a lot better this time around. It definitely feels more like a show for everyone. There are adult jokes and pop culture references, but there are still wacky over-the-top cartoony jokes. Although this season is definitely a strong improvement over season 1, it still doesn't feel like the show has quite reached its fullest potential. Most of the stories are still pretty basic, and while the animation has definitely improved, they don't do a ton with it this season. With one exception, that being The Job, which is easily the best episode of this entire season. It plays with the status quo in a very interesting way, has gorgeous animation, and is probably the most ambitious episode up to this point in the series. Please check it out if you have the chance, it's really good. But outside of that one, there's no real standout episode this season. It's fairly standard, which definitely isn't a bad thing, just not quite as good as what's to come. Speaking of which, Season 3 of Gumball is a really good season. This is the Kirby's Dream Land 3 of Gumball seasons, in that it's not necessarily the best season, but the rest of the show wouldn't be the same without it. First off, there's the change in animation. It's definitely not as noticeable as the jump from season 1 to 2, but there still are some little differences. The characters' eyes are a lot more rounded than the ovally shape they had in season 1 and 2. It also looks like the lighting is a bit brighter this season. I like these changes overall, but I wouldn't have minded a whole lot if this show had looked exactly like it did in season 2. Another big change this season is that there's more of a focus towards continuity. Starting with the very first episode, The Kids, Gumball and Darwin's voices change and they get new ones, which actually last until they get new voices again. I'm pretty sure this is the only show I've seen to actually acknowledge a switch in voice actors. Well, besides Star Vs, but Glassrock sucks, so I don't count that. The episode has a pretty good song in it too, it's a pretty good one. Then there's The Name, an episode where we actually get to see a bunch of Gumball's memories from earlier episodes. There's also The Nobody, an episode that reintroduces Rob as a villain. He's pretty important throughout the rest of the series, and I think it's a pretty cool concept. Taking a character that nobody knew or cared about and making him a villain, that's pretty cool. Then there's The Shell, my personal favorite episode of not just the season, but quite possibly the entire series. The episode where we finally get to see what Penny looks like under her shell, as well as the one where she and Gumball officially tie the knot. The cinematography in this episode is just gorgeous. The episode is the perfect blend between emotion and comedy. And like most people, I love Penny's new design. One of the show's finest 11 minutes. And that's not even all of them. This is also when the series started getting more meta. Most notably in The Money, where the show actually acknowledges the fact that it's a cartoon that needs money to be animated. There's also The Void, an episode that acknowledges the fact that some characters get retconned. There's also The Pizza, the episode that acknowledges the fact that every job on the show is done by Larry. So yeah, season 3 is pretty much where Gumball found its footing. The rest of the series would be very different if it weren't for this season. Now with season 3 out of the way, we can move on to season 4. This one's gonna be pretty brief, as there really weren't that many changes between seasons 3 and 4. Not that that's a bad thing, the show had already found its groove back in season 3. Now it's just expanding on that and maybe going a bit more over the top with it. So I think I'm just gonna talk about some of the more notable episodes this season. First off, we've got The Hug, the first use of awkward, cringe humor in Gumball, and I think it works really well. Gumball has basically mastered making something just cringeworthy enough to be funny, but not so much as to go overboard with it. There's also The Blame, a hilarious commentary on how society views video games, and probably my favorite episode of the season. There's also The Origins, a pretty notable episode in that it's the very first two-parter the show's ever done, and also explains how Darwin grew legs. It's not one of my personal favorites, as I think other episodes do a better job blending the emotion and the comedy, and I find it a little cheesy, but it's still a really good story. And most importantly, there's the season finale, The Disaster. Quite possibly the most intense and epic episode up to this point in the series, with amazing cinematography and an enticing cliffhanger. All in all, season 4 is a really good season. Like I said, it's not that different from season 3, outside of it being a little bit more over the top, but again, I don't think that's a bad thing. But does season 5 take the series in a different direction? Let's find out. Season 5 is the most divisive season of Gumball, mostly because this is when the show started doing more social commentaries. Episodes such as The Stars, The Best, The Worst, The Nuisance, and The News. I can see why some people were put off by this change, but I personally never minded it. To me, it never really felt like the social commentaries were taking over the show. It still felt very wacky and silly and over the top. It's just that now there was occasionally a little jab at society. It's not even like this concept is really that new to Gumball. They've been doing it since season 3, it's just that now it's a bit more prevalent. I kinda like that Gumball has basically just become a kid-friendly version of The Simpsons. They're able to skip around the censors in some pretty creative ways. So all in all, I really don't mind this direction for Gumball. But of course, you can't talk about the season without talking about easily its best episode, The Choices. A beautiful and elegantly told love story, as well as a wonderful reminder that every choice we make has a major effect on our lives. This episode was clearly inspired by the first 10 minutes of Up, and yet it never feels like a ripoff of Up. It feels very original. Easily one of the best episodes of Gumball. Some of my other favorites include The Copycat. It's so cool seeing the show acknowledge its Chinese ripoff in a very tasteful and respectful way. It's also a very clever commentary on the originality as a whole. The Console, a very loving yet hilarious parody of video games. This episode both makes fun of and celebrates video game culture. And even if you don't play very many video games, it's still a very entertaining episode. And The News. If this isn't an accurate representation of the news, then I don't know what is. This episode never gets talked about, but it's really funny. Check it out if you have the time. I know not everyone's gonna agree with me here, but I think Season 5 is a fantastic season. It's filled with very creative and hilarious episodes. I understand if you like it less than earlier seasons, but in my opinion, the show has only gotten better. But how well of a job does Season 6 do in capping off the series? Let's find out. 6 seasons in, and Gumball is still just as imaginative as it was back in Season 1. The show is still filled to the brim with creative ideas and stories. It never feels like the writers are running out of steam. Some of my personal favorite episodes this season include The Shippening, an episode that both parodies and celebrates the show's fandom. It's done in a very loving way that shows that there's no real hate going around for the people who draw fan art of these characters. It's just the show's creative way of acknowledging them, and it's a really good episode. The Parents, a bottle episode, which is actually pretty rare for Gumball. It discusses Nicole's relationship with her parents in an actually very mature way, but still manages to have some good jokes in there, and it has a really good song in there too. And my personal favorite episode of the season, The Faith, an episode that not only has really clever jokes and really nice looking visuals, but also has a very mature message about finding the good in the world. The message in this episode could have easily just been that everything is a-okay, but it's a little more complicated than that. It's about acknowledging the bad stuff while still trying to find the positives in life. It's a beautiful message, and the song that accompanies it is just wonderful. And of course, we have to talk about the finale, The Inquisition. Many people were disappointed with this finale since it ends on a cliffhanger and we're not sure whether or not it's going to be followed up on. And personally, I'm right there with them. If this never gets followed up on, I will be very disappointed. I really don't want another show to get the Clone High treatment. As for the episode itself, I actually really like it. I think introducing a live-action character actually works really well for a Gumball finale. The fact that he's turning all of the cartoon characters into humans and they have to beat him with cartooniness is not only very thematic, but also sort of feels like a commentary on what Disney's doing with their live-action remakes. But as it is, I really hope this isn't the way the show ends for good. But as a whole, Season 6 is a really good season, and shows that the Gumball team still has a ton of creativity left in them. So I think it's pretty obvious what I'm going to say here. Obviously, this show was rebirthed. The further it evolved, the funnier and more creative the show got, and it's genuinely one of my favorite cartoons of all time. Here's what Raiden from the League of Incredible Critics had to say when I asked about whether or not Gumball got bad. Definitely not. The show got way better each season. And yeah, I completely agree. There will be shows on here eventually where I'm not really sure whether or not they eroded or were rebirthed, but Gumball is absolutely not one of those shows. I had no doubts here whatsoever. But if you disagree, please let me know in the comments, and have a good day. Kirby, out.